one of the things we need to be on the lookout for as real estate investors is rising delinquencies and rising foreclosures. If you're paying attention and you're looking behind the noise, you're starting to see some real movement in delinquencies and real movement in foreclosures. We're going to have this conversation with the one and only Lance Lambert from Resi Club, who is housing. How you doing, buddy? Nice to talk to you again.
Doing great. Always so much going on in the housing market. And I think when we talk about distress for both the consumer and the household, I think a important thing is just to kind of zoom out at the moment that we went through. So during the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdowns, because it was such a sharp hit and it didn't feel like it was a part of the business cycle, and it felt like people were going to have to sacrifice to help others, to kind of prevent the spread, right? At least that was the idea, right? And so the government responded in a way that was really unprecedented to other economic shocks, right?
Agreed.
They went in and they did max. They did the max of everything, right? They wanted to prevent anybody from feeling the squeeze. So it's PPP to protect businesses. It's the stimulus checks. It's the bolstering unemployment. And it's, obviously what the Fed did, not to get into it too much, but all of this, right, is to kind of protect households. Well, another thing that they did there is that they tried to prevent foreclosures during this period. And so they were put on hold. And there was forbearance that was rolled out as well, and these COVID-19 programs that lasted a while. Now, some of them rolled off. Of course, some of the forbearance rolled off 2021 late, and some of these other things, kind of like student loans, have taken a really long time to fully get back to normal. And only this past few weeks has student loans finally gotten all the way back to where it was before the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And so for student loans, yes, people have technically had to pay for a little while here, but they weren't getting dinged on their credit, right? And so now those are getting reported. And so that's causing student loan delinquencies to shoot up. And I'll show that data in a moment. And that shock there of it getting reported is also going to lock some people out of being able to buy cars and homes over the next 12, 24 months. Now, how many people is it? At the end of the day, if they weren't paying their student loans, what does that say about them as a consumer and actually being ready to buy, right? But it's somebody. And the New York Fed analysis that was published 8 weeks ago found that for super prime borrowers, so super prime is the opposite of subprime. Super prime are people with 760 and above. For super prime, that group, for those who weren't paying, they're going to see 160-point drop in their credit scores on average. So that would be from like 760 to 600, right? Or if they're at 800 to 640 or or 660.
Yeah, 640.
So it has an impact there, right? And now on the foreclosures, we have seen some things that were slowing those down. And so VA foreclosures had started back. And then last year, early 2024, and I might be getting my months wrong in terms of when it happened, but I believe it was in the first quarter, the Biden administration had stopped VA foreclosures again.
They did.
Yep. And so those have rolled back in Q1. And I think we had a discussion here, me and you, about how this Q1 2025 data, once we got it from the New York Fed, would show a pop because those foreclosures were coming in. So this was completely expected, and I'll show the numbers in a moment. But in terms of what happened to the student loan delinquencies and then this pop for foreclosure for housing, this was pretty expected.
Yeah, and again, I think what people need to realize is we've been talking about this for a while, and it's just a natural part of the system. Anytime just think about being a kid and putting your hand on a garden hose, right? A thumb on the garden hose. You can hold back the pressure for a while, but once you either lift your thumb or you leave it there too long, this is just going to come flying out. So I expect delinquencies to get worse. I expect foreclosures to get worse. But this, again, is just cleaning out a system. One of the things that I have been a little frustrated with is we haven't allowed the system to clean itself for a couple of years, right? Part of this process is supposed to work that you sign up for a loan. If you don't pay the loan, you lose your house. And we have basically delayed that for hundreds of thousands and maybe millions of people. And now we're going to clean it up. And, that's going to be painful for some, but for the year of the investor, it's going to create some amazing opportunities. And I look forward to that.
And so here's U.S. housing foreclosures. These are housing. These are not multifamily or commercial, which are actually have jumped a lot more than housing have. You can see that we're not back to 2019 levels yet. We're slowly drifting back up after that really big drop off during the pandemic period when they halted a lot of the foreclosures. And now we're working back. So we're up 40% year over year, but still 13% below pre-pandemic 2019.
Well, let me say something else about this. I know you won't say it, but I will. That chart's going higher. You can't keep your thumb like on the chart. If you look at 2021 Q1, that is your thumb on the garden hose. And then when you remove it, you're going to have to make up for that. So that line on the far end, which is up 40%, is and will go higher. It will go above 2019 levels, but it likely won't stay there. We've just got so much. I mean, there were people who haven't paid on their FHA mortgage for like 3 or 4 years. Yeah. They just kept getting it kicked to the second, and it's a silent second. There's no equity there. So we have some junk, some garbage, some bad loans that need to be washed out of the system, and it's going to make this chart look artificially high. And it's going to happen. It's not an if, it's just now a when.
So we're going up. I agree with that. I think the big question here is, getting back to at least pre-pandemic levels, we're going to get there. The bigger question is these ones that we're missing the past 3.5, 4 years, were they delayed? Are these coming back? Are we going to have a period where we're jumping above trend? So I think those are some of the bigger questions to kind of like keep an eye out on.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say about this, because before we go forward, is this is happening now with unemployment at 4.2%. If you look at this chart and just close your eyes and think what happens if we have unemployment at 5%, this gets worse. So that's one of the things we got to realize. This chart, in my opinion, will go higher, will go above 2019. But if we blink and it's 5% unemployment, that's just more pain coming down the system.
And so foreclosures are lagging. They're furthest behind when it comes to credit distress. And so if you want to zoom out and get an idea of what could be coming next for foreclosures, one of the big things to look at, 90-day delinquencies.
Yep.
And so 90-day delinquencies, they obviously got a really big jump for student loans here, right?
Look at that.
We expected this. This was an abnormal drop off here. And I actually expect it to go higher. I think this is, it's going to continue to go higher there. Credit card is definitely telling us that the bottom, let's say fourth of the country, the bottom of the country in terms of household finances is getting squeezed in this higher rate environment. And it's between the fact of inflation and maybe their wages not keeping up with inflation, trying to keep their lifestyle keeping up with inflation, and the fact that credit card interest rates have also gotten higher. And so that compounds that squeeze. You can see that auto has completely at least normalized back to pre-pandemic 2019 levels.
But let me talk about that again. Again, this chart, because we kept our thumb on the hose, thus the fall. I expect it too to go higher before it comes back. This is just a pendulum. Also, could you guys remember all the TikTok videos about people bragging that I had $1,000 car payment? Well, they had $1,000 car payment because they weren't paying their student loans and they weren't doing this and they weren't doing that. Well, guess what? All that's coming due, and suddenly that $1,000 car payment's not affordable. So I expect that too to go higher.
Yeah, and there are people who thought, and I think a part of it is a perfect storm here, where you have people not paying a debt, right, during the pandemic, right? They start to think it's not real. Then they're told by politicians or people running that, hey, all those loans, they're going to disappear, right? So then they really start to think it's fake debt. And then, it's back now. Their credit score's dropping. And the past few weeks, the federal government announced that they're going to start wage garnishing
I saw that.
and also tax return garnishing.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I never believed that the student loan forgiveness was going to come because it felt like something that Congress would have to pass. But the fact that the last administration got so many people to believe it was going to disappear, it fundamentally changed behavior. And unfortunately, the behavior change was more auto debt, more credit card debt, and then not to get the forgiveness, and now to get potentially wages garnished and income. It's a sad, sad story.
So kind of the moral hazard with it is what you hinted at before, which is if you have this amount of debt, right, that you think's not real, and you're not paying it, right?
Yeah.
Or you're at least not being wise and putting the money aside to start paying it when the interest comes back. And then, oh, lo and behold, you take that amount of spending and you start to place it somewhere else, right?
Exactly.
That's where you get into a pinch for some of these households. And so second mortgages, the HELOCs and the mortgages, they're ticking up. Still for the 90-day, for the total percent of balances, nothing too crazy there. Still below.
Yeah, the thing that I really want people to realize about mortgages is, yes, we do have more mortgage pain coming, and I hit that really hard in the previous picture, but this is not going back to '08 levels. Why? Because the debt structure is fundamentally different. 50% of loan originations in '06 were variable, 51% if memory serves. A couple of years ago, it was 98% of loans were fixed. We have millions of people, probably 50, 60, 80 million people who have fixed their shelter cost at artificially low levels. So the fact is, if you own your home and you've got a loan below 4%, right, wrong, good, bad, doesn't matter. Your shelter cost is artificially low. However, if you're a renter, doesn't feel very good. So again, I do not expect mortgage debt to explode like '08.
Where we would have been more concerned is if, and I'm not saying it's not going to rise because, right, obviously this is still working up and some of this is rising. But I think where you would be more concerned is if the past couple of years during this housing downturn, we had had more transactions because there was more of these mortgage products trying to win at the edges. And then if you have a downturn, those would be the groups that you would have to keep the closest eye out on. Now,
you're
of course,
absolutely right.
You are going to have to keep a close eye out on the vintages of, 23, 24, 25 if we did have a downturn. But that's just how housing works. And it's always the most recent vintages. But at least because during this housing downturn, transactions have been very low and you haven't seen as many of those people squeezing in as you did the last cycle.
Correct.
So 30-day leads 90-day. And so if you look at 30-day, you will see that for mortgages transitioning into 30-day delinquent, that is actually slightly above now pre-pandemic 2019. It's been working up from its lows. And so now it's 3.71%. And that is just above where we were 17, 18, 19. And I should say for historical reference, 17, 18, 19 were actually very low years for 30-day delinquencies for mortgage. And so here you can see the 30-day delinquent chart. Student loans shot up. One of the slightly more positive things that we've seen lately is that credit card and auto are no longer shooting up for 30-day, which leads 90-day. 90-day is still ticking up as those kind of roll in, but you have started to see credit card and auto start to, kind of pause here, right? They're kind of hitting some type of plateau. And I think the big thing to always watch out on these is when they're shooting up, right? Those are the things to keep an eye on. So that's notable that they've kind of hit some type of plateau. Who knows what kind of comes the next 6, 12, 18 months, but they're no longer shooting up like they were the past couple years as the market kind of absorbed the interest rate shock. You can see that mortgage shot up as well for 30-day. And, it's kind of hard to see what be able to tell exactly where this will trend next. But given that it is back to pre-pandemic levels, I think that's a sign that 90 days is going to work back up, and that then foreclosures as well are going to get back to at least 2019 levels or above it. And student loans, this is probably going to continue to shoot up here. I don't know if I don't think we've hit the top there for that.
Not yet. Not yet. Yeah. Yeah. The other thing to remember, folks, is somebody who experienced the last great financial crisis, this foreclosure stuff. I want to give you again a hint of the timeline from first missed payment, i.e. 30 days late, to you can buy a foreclosure. So again, you're going to go through 30 days late. At the end of 90 days, you're likely to get what's called a notice of default. It's the first step in the foreclosure process. That then will trigger a whole bunch of other processes, which are between 60 and 90 days. So now you're at half a year. Then based on the state, city, all of that, it could be a year before your first missed payment, before you lose your home. And then let's not forget that the average foreclosure during the great financial crisis was over 2 years across the country. And in some states like California, Nevada, Florida, was 3 years. So if you are looking for foreclosures to suddenly spike inventory, distressed inventory to come in the next couple of months, you are severely misunderstanding the process and the timeline. If we're looking at this today on May 15th, your best hope for a real increase in foreclosure and distress is best case November, but probably more like February of 2026, giving past timelines. So I just want people to have the right frame of reference for timeline.
And another thing that's notable with foreclosures is that, let's say somebody gets distressed, right? And they need to sell.
Yep.
It's possible they could just sell, right?
Correct.
And not,
Correct.
Because the other thing here is that there isn't a lot of the country that is negative equity, right?
Correct.
And prices, yes, some of these boom towns and some of these different pockets, especially maybe if it's a hot Airbnb area, right? There's some, but there isn't a ton.
Right.
So, you would need also, I think, prices to have declined more to really get this going.
Agreed.
Beyond where the current trajectory is.
Very cool. Well, again, I think the housing market is starting to heal itself. Pulte, I forget his first name, leading of the HUD, he's identified a lot of HFA shenanigans, which again need to be cleaned up. So more foreclosures, more pain, more nonsense to come out of this. But the other thing I think is interesting when you step back and look at housing, Lance, is I think we've looked at peak uncertainty from an economic and consumer perspective in the rearview mirror. I think we hit that 2 weeks ago. I'm hearing from real estate agents and brokers, so again, very much talking their own book, but it does appear like demand is coming back as uncertainty lessens. I don't know if anything is showing up in the data yet, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that if you have any.
You have seen like mortgage purchase applications seasonally adjusted bounce up a little bit from where they were at the lows during that period. But I think some of this probably that they're seeing is that there was some spring demand that should have been out there.
Yeah.
It was kind of just the confidence was broken a little more than otherwise would have been. But in terms of like the big picture trend, I think you're still seeing this market that is coming out of this, historic overheating and rate shock and still trying to, stomach this, right? Because the affordability move has been so acute and we got so tight for the housing market when all of that demand during the pandemic just absorbed up active inventory. And so we're still kind of working out of that. I think the, one thing to note is that, we are still in this environment where actives are moving up, right, on a nationally aggregated basis. Of course, some markets more than others. But next spring, we're going to enter into that market with at least 200,000 more active listings for sale next spring.
For sure.
And so, I think kind of keeping an eye on what is the trend for active listings through the rest of this year during the seasonally soft period, give us an indication of what that next spring could kind of could feel like.
Oh, I love that. And I know one thing for sure, we talk each and every week, but even better, you put out 5 articles a week for free. Where can people sign up?
Not quite 5 anymore for free, but I still out a few reports to my free list every week. Anybody who goes to resiclubanalytics.com can sign up to get my data, some of my data stories every week. And then I also have a pro membership, Resi Club Pro, my premium offering, 3 additional research articles per week, plus access to my monthly webinars that I do discussing what's going on in the U.S. housing market. And you can follow me on LinkedIn at Lance Lambert, or you can find me on Twitter at News Lambert.
I love the fact that you're doing monthly sessions with your pro community. I think that is an awesome addition. And again, don't forget access to his data, his repository. If you're looking for a buy box history, there is no better place than what Lance has at his disposal in the pro community. Lance, you're amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.